basically I'm partially trying to use this to train myself out of the habit of overanalyzing everything I say, trying to figure out if it makes sense before it comes out of my mouth. Because I hate it when I say something and somebody thinks that they get what I mean, but because of the way I said it, was actually completely misunderstood. So then not only do I have to re-explain what I actually meant, but I have to, like, get them to let go of that conclusion that they've already drawn, if that makes sense. Which is harder than just, a lot of times, than just stopping and overanalyzing in the hopes of phrasing shit right to begin with. But I'm trying to at least get a little bit less obsessive about it, I guess. So basically, after if anybody missed my story earlier about how a friend and I showed up on the campus where I got my associate's degree a couple years ago to surprise our favorite professor, who was also kind of a mentor slash work study supervisor slash 5 days a week project teammate of sorts. Like, definitely a more important or more influential figure, I guess, in my life than just, you know, a professor I took a couple classes from or whatever. Even just as a professor, though, best professor I have ever had. And I've been to a more different schools than most people, I think. Technically, I think I've attended 4 now. One of them I only took 2 classes and ended up withdrawing from both because I was in Boston and I figured out that taking part-time classes and working a full-time job were my only transportation was public transit or lengthy walks to get to and from work was not a sustainable thing for me. Anyway, that aside, showed up to surprise him because he thought I was still in Florida, where I was living for the last 1.5 years before February. He did not know I had moved back. In fact, he and I are friends on Facebook, so Facebook still says I live in Florida because I was trying to avoid ruining the surprise, and boy, was that worth it. He was so friggin' shocked. But it was... What was the phrase Genova used earlier? Soul boosting? Just how delighted he was to see me. I wasn't expecting that. Like, I was expecting that, you know, he'd enjoy the surprise visit, but I was not expecting a literal double take, followed by utter shock, followed by a prompt hug. I still managed to mute before coughing. I have not blown anyone's eardrums out yet. Yeah, he's a great guy. He was very much like technically he wasn't my advisor, like, academically, but he may as well have been. Like, I was in the IT security program, which had a lot of classes that overlapped with the classes that he taught. Plus a lot of the, like, you know how they'll give you a list of electives and they'll be like, you have to choose 3 of this list? I enjoyed his classes so much that I chose as many of those, as many of the classes on that list as I could find that he taught, specifically just to take classes from him because I felt like I learned so much from him and I loved it. But as a result of taking one additional class that I got 0 credit for my major, but I took because it was the fourth part of a 4-part networking, or a series of networking classes where I was already taking the other 3 parts for my major and I was really enjoying it. I was like, okay, I don't want to switch to a networking major, but I'm going to take the 4th class because why the hell not? But because of that and a couple of other elective choices I made, I'm actually only 3 classes short of a second associate's degree in networking, which would make him my advisor. I just wasn't the direction I was headed at the time. But he was the... I was basically the... I phrased it... I basically invented myself a new work. I was a work study student for like a year and a half, but specifically for the like IT faculty. I called myself the IT faculty minion. Well, basically, I would just help them with whatever projects they were working on or whatever. But I ended up working on stuff with him more often than any of the other faculty. So in a lot of ways, he was also sort of my direct supervisor, even though technically he wasn't. Anyway. So he thought I was still in Florida. Surprise, surprise, when I show up randomly in the hallway across from his classroom. He ended up spending an hour and a half standing out in the hallway talking to me and my friend. Which I mean, like I said, I expected he'd enjoy the surprise visit. I was not expecting him to be so delighted by it that he basically set up his class. It was only like 2 or 3 people to take their final exam in the classroom, and then he stepped out in the hall and spent an hour and a half just talking to us. Hold on, I need to do some of this before people start approaching. Oh, that did nothing. Apparently that's only good for the hardening bit. That's unfortunate, because that did, like, no damage whatsoever. Anyway, so, so of course in the process of catching up, you know, he asked the natural question, because he knew that I moved down to Florida to finish my bachelor's degree. Because at one point, before I chose a school, I actually went and talked to him after class one day, and he was helping me compare a couple of options that I was looking at. So, he knew I'd gone down there to finish my bachelor's degree. He knew, that I'd chosen the school I had because of the way the curriculum lined up and all this stuff. And that, in theory, I should be able to finish my bachelor's degree and, like, going down with the plan of continuing the whole full-time student, live on financial aid and drive deliveries for Uber Eats when I need extra cash sort of thing that I had been doing. Taking classes full-time and over the summer, I should have been able to finish my bachelor's in 2 years. Skipping summer classes, it would be like 3. So I was only down there a year and a half. So of course, you know, he asked the natural question, which I was fully expecting, which was, so what brings you back? Like, because he may not have, like, stopped to do all the calculations, but he knew that I hadn't been down there long enough to actually finish the full degree yet. So I was explaining that basically I was been dealing with health stuff since last summer that got to the point where I couldn't anymore, and like the beginning of October it was sort of a, okay, this is not good. I was taking half-time classes, struggling to keep up with them, not working, and kind of just scraping by. And kind of going, okay, if we stay here, it'll take me 6 years to finish my degree, but... And I was sort of starting to toy with... The thought had crossed my mind about moving back early, but I hadn't, like, really considered how that would play out or anything. By the 1st of November, I had completely decided to move home as soon as my lease was up. Because over the course of a month, it got worse enough that I was like, okay, at this rate, I'm going to be lucky if I'm functioning well enough to even move in January. Like, this shit's crazy. And I didn't know anybody down there. Well, I made technically two friends while I was down there. They were married to each other, and I only ever saw them at the same time. So in my head, they're sort of two halves of the same friend. That sounds really weird. You know what I mean. Very, very sweet people. But, you know, I had a daughter who's only 10 years younger than I am. Close to my parents' age. Have their own lives, their own social everything. You know, it's not like... It wasn't like the one friend I made was the one other out-of-state introvert who also had no friends and therefore was looking actively for another introvert to have a social life with or something, you know. So I basically had no social life while I was down there, except for rare occasions, which were awesome. But, you know, not much in the way of, like, a support system to fall back on. All my family's in North Carolina. And so basically I was like, okay, I need to be where I have more, like, actual support. Because there isn't even really a cheap way. No, this was Florida Panhandle. I grew up in North Carolina. My family's all still in North Carolina. I did live in Boston for a couple of years. Loved that, but that was like a decade ago at this point. I mean, I guess I still have a couple of friends in the Boston area, but they're nobody close enough that I would consider them a support system at this point, just because it was so long ago. Basically, all the people I'm closest with are here, or some way, shape, or form tied to here. I have one friend who's an almost constantly touring musician, but one of his regular stopover places is right nearby, so, you know, same difference. It's as close as he gets to living somewhere, I guess. But also, like, and I mean, there were other factors that sort of encouraged the decision, or were like the cherries on top of the pile of reasons, of health-related reasons why, I guess. Stuff like, my grandmother, who practically helped raise me, is getting noticeably older almost by the week. Like, she hasn't officially been diagnosed with any form of dementia, but there's definitely some kind going on, and has been for quite some time, but she's getting less and less lucid by the week. My dad's spending half the days over at her house just dealing with, like, basic stuff for her, so that she can keep living in her house for as long as possible. But she's starting to get to the point where my parents are starting to make contingency plans for how they'll arrange the bedrooms in their house if/when they need to bring her to live with them. You know, just family stuff. And none of it was like big enough or compelling enough for me to put my bachelor's degree on hold again. I say again because I've tried for a bachelor's degree at least once before. Got interrupted. Granted, it was a different bachelor's, and I'm glad I never bothered finishing that because it was a waste of money. But still, interrupting yet another attempt at my bachelor's degree. But it got to the point where, by the time the fall semester ended, I was seriously wondering if I had actually waited too long to make the decision to move back, and if I was going to make it through all the stuff that January required. Because basically, I was up here over the holidays for 3 weeks, went back to Florida like the day after New Year's, and then basically had 3 weeks to pack up my whole apartment by myself, as a new semester was technically starting. It got close enough. It was not packed up, and the moving process was somewhat traumatic because when my mom is on a mission, she's a freight train, and I was too tired to survive a freight train by that point. But it got done. All my shit got moved to North Carolina, so, you know, all's well that ends well, I suppose. Either way, though, so I always have difficulty, like, explaining stuff like this to people. Well, no, not really, because I only just got health insurance, so I haven't even seen a doctor yet. Like, okay, so this is the other weird complicated bit, is that it's not like I can explain to people by being like, this is my diagnosis, this is the plan of action, status is set and rolling. It's very much still a lot of question marks. Like, for example, I haven't technically had the genetic test because genetic testing is stupid expensive. But we basically know that I have some variant of Ehlers-Danlos, which is a genetic disorder that basically affects connective tissue. But there's connective tissue in everything, so there are like 13 different like sub-varieties that are all like basically errors in different specific genes. So they can test for specific variants. It's just stupid expensive to get it done. And, you know, most of them are just, this is what's going to be more affected by it versus this. You know, for some people it's joints, for some people it's, it tends to be more like skin and bruising type stuff. I can't even think of most of the variants off the top of my head. The most common is hypermobile, which is super flexible joints to the point of like accidentally dislocating your own joints and shit. That's the most common type. It's also the one type they don't know the specific gene for. But it's also the least like long-term harmful. And like I said, the most common. The bigger concern at the moment, and the reason why it's not just a matter of walking into any old doctor, because it's becoming more well known, but it's still rare enough that finding a doctor who's even like really familiar with it more than you are from a ton of internet research, for example, let alone someone who has experience with EDS patients, is still pretty few and far between, just because, I mean, let me put it this way. the like EDS community has adopted a zebra as their mascot because of the saying, if you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras, because 99.9% of the time it's going to be horses. EDS is the 1% that's actually zebras. So they adopted a zebra, which I think was kind of funny. But I was looking for poison for his blade. I'm fantastic at this multitasking thing, can't you tell? Yeah, and it varies for different people. Like, some people, even, like, no matter what type they have, some people go half their lives without ever having a symptom, and their entire lives without ever having enough symptoms to get diagnosed. Other people have joint problems from, like, childhood. Like, it's insanely variable. Not helped by the fact that connective tissue is in literally, like, every part of your body, so even the symptoms aren't necessarily consistent, even necessarily within the same subtype. At least not in a point to go, oh yeah, that's definitely that sort of way, if that makes sense. The biggest concern right now is basically finding someone who can make the necessary recommendations and deal with the insurance company and stuff to get them to approve me getting tested specific for one specific subtype, which is the vascular subtype.
Very well.
It's distinctly the most severe type, but not just that, it's like the one that stands out as particularly severe. Like, the others have varying levels of severity, or like the severity will vary between people. I mean, that goes for vascular too. But let me put it this way. Every other subtype, there's no expectation that, assuming that it's identified and you're, like, you know, not doing all of the wrong things for your body all the time, there's no reason to think that you'd have any, like, long-term severe effects from most of the subtypes. Assuming you're taking care of stuff. Now, you might be restricted in certain activities and things. There might be stuff that it's really not recommended you do, like certain sports and stuff like that. But it's not like barring extreme neglect, none of them are considered life-threatening. The vascular subtype is, largely because a lot of times it's actually only diagnosed because you have a major, like, health crisis that pops up out of nowhere that makes people go, wait a second, why are you having a heart attack at the age of 25? Or, you know, an aneurysm or something, and they go looking for it. Now, fortunately, none of those things have happened to me, knock on wood. But a lot of oh, yeah, Armor Merchant, welcome in. There are very few bad games in the world, to be honest. I think they're just games that some people enjoy more than others. I haven't played Dragon Age 2, so I can't say. Well, that's about it, but anyway, a lot of my symptoms and stuff line up with circulation and blood pressure related problems. So basically, the primary concern is finding out for sure one way or the other if I actually have the vascular subtype, because that's a specific gene they can test for, right? You just have to get the insurance company to pay for it because genetic testing. It's like stupid expensive. Stupid expensive. Armor Merchant, you're welcome to share why you think that, but just trust me is not a valid rationale for basically anything. That's not a logical argument or debate point or any of those things.
Very well.
Ow. I got smacked, that hurt. So,
magic isn't working anymore.
Have you no concern for your...
Anyway, to get back to the point. There's this thing going on campus tomorrow where the capstone classes, which the professor I was telling you about earlier, has been working for years to basically get the IT department capstone projects to get the IT department, the capstone projects for like networking and security and programming and data analytics and all those things basically integrated into one big project. So the networking capstone builds their network. The security capstone secures the networking capstone's network. They then connect it to the data analytics database, which is then, you know, programming does whatever they do with it. All of that stuff. But don't feed the trolls, ass. But it's really cool because they're doing so their presentation of this project, so he finally got it through, and it wasn't even just networking and security like he was talking about 2 or 3 years ago. As they're banned. Besides, you know better than to feed the trolls. Just makes them get bigger. So years ago, he was talking about just combining networking and security, and he was struggling to even get that much done. Turns out he got all of the departments combined. Not only that, but they're doing their like project presentation tomorrow night, and they have a live demo of the whole thing in action, which is super cool. So like the security team is going to come in and test the network, test the security of the programming, and try and get, you know, mock-up data from the data analytics database from their capstone through the networking capstone's network and all this stuff. It's super neat stuff. And so my professor was like, well, you should come if you want. And I was like, hell yeah, I want to see that. Sure, plus there are some professors that I haven't seen. You're fine. It's okay, I understand the urge. But that's why I didn't say anything, by the way. I'm just not feeding. All the cookies are for me and my people, not for the trolls. Or this week it's donut holes, actually. Not cookies, but whatever. It's whatever Walmart has on sale. Anywho. So there are a couple of other professors that I was hoping to run into. One in particular, actually the other networking professor, who...
That got him!
Sort of, it's almost like a... If we were in high school, I would have called her my surrogate school mom. Except that I was in my mid-20s and, you know, she's a professor at a college, but that was very much the vibe she gave off. Where, you know, very, very much the school mom sort of vibe, at least for the department. So she doesn't know I've moved back either. And I haven't seen her in years either. So I know that she'll be there tomorrow night because she's one of the professors for the department. So, so immediately I was going, okay, well, I don't currently have a life, so there's definitely no scheduling issues. Got him. Nice timing. I wield the bop hammer, and I go bop, and they go poof. But I was thinking about it after I left today because she's going to ask me the same thing, right? And I always get annoyed with myself because I feel like, oh yeah, it's super interesting. But like I mentioned on the Discord that I had all these thoughts going around in my head, and then the title of the stream, which I haven't even touched on yet, not bullshit, not clickbait. I got distracted by dying in battle and forgot to get there. But basically, I was having a hard time explaining what was going on that was a big enough deal for me to put my bachelor's degree on an indefinite hold for a second time. I moved 700 miles back to North Carolina in the middle of a semester without, like, all the words that wanted to come out of my mouth, none of that sounded like it justified any of those sort of like drastic life change sort of shit. And so I was trying to figure out why that was. The first thing I came up with was, I think it's kind of a two-part thing. I kind of suspect, oops, I didn't mean to have everybody, oh, I don't have everybody selected. The first part I think is that I've always been kind of like hyper aware in a sense of ways that I could completely reasonably be coming across to other people, if that makes sense. Even if that's not necessarily like how I am coming across. If you take like the generic general public or whatever, I feel like I'm making this more confusing than it needs to be. Hold on. Let me simplify it. Hold on. I tried to simplify it, and the whole train ran away without me. Oh, okay, so in this case, for example, whether or not the specific person I'm talking to would ever think in that way doesn't change how acutely aware I am that I do not look or sound or act like someone who has a completely life-shutting down level of severity health issues going on. Like, I don't look the part. I don't talk the part. I don't act the part. Whatever that means. And really, who even knows what that means? But there's certain, like, you know, sort of the whole, like, invisible illness thing as a whole, actually, because it's like even people who intellectually believe you have a hard time really, like, fully processing what it is that you're saying when the senses don't match, right? When what they're hearing doesn't click in their brains with what they're seeing. Even if their, critical reasoning, it fully believes you, on some level there's a disconnect. And I'm acutely aware of that enough that I find myself having a hard time, like, explaining the shit that's been going on, because I feel like I'm just, even though I know full well that I tend to actually, like, minimize the hell out of shit, trying to actually, like, explain what's going on to somebody, knowing that I look and sound like a normal, functional 20-something-year-old of completely average health to them, makes it feel like I'm spouting just total, like, ridiculous nonsense, even though I know full well I'm not. Does that make any sense at all? But that makes it really hard not to minimize whatever I'm saying even more, to the point where the way I'm describing stuff doesn't make sense for the amount of life uprooting I've done because of it. So I think that's part of the problem. The thing is, I don't know how to fix that. The other thing, what was the other thing? So that was the thing about self-conscious communication. Hold on, I'm about to check my own stream title to remember what my other point was. But I am not the clickbaity type. If I say I'm going to chat about something, I will damn well chat about it at least briefly, even if most everybody's asleep by that point. Sounds like a lot of... Well, it's not so much that I'm actively thinking about them, it's that... Imagine that you fractured your foot, right? And you limp into the emergency room, or even better, let's say you stub your toe really hard and you're pretty sure it's broken, but as long as you put your weight on the other side of your foot, you can walk okay. So you walk into the emergency room and it hurts, but it's a fractured toe. It's not like, after the initial ouch, it's not, earth-shattering amounts of pain or anything. It's just painful and really uncomfortable and would really like to make it stop, sort of deal. So you walk into the emergency room and completely calm tone, you tell them that you stubbed your toe really hard and you're pretty sure that you broke it. After they just watched you walk seemingly normally into the emergency room, and you're just talking to them like you're talking about the weather and not about the fact that you think you have a broken bone that you're currently standing on. Knowing that regardless of how much you're feeling it hurt, what they're seeing is somebody walking in and being like, oh, hey, I broke a bone, can you fix it? And just acting totally normal. It feels a little weird, right? To be like, oh, hey, I think, pretty sure I broke a bone in my foot that I'm currently standing on. Can you fix it for me? Like, it feels weird to address something that's supposed to be so, such a big deal in what feels like an disproportionately undramatic way, I guess. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm actually clarifying anything here. But it's not so much a worrying about what the other person is thinking as it is a feeling weird about a feeling like you're acting one thing and saying the opposite, if that makes sense. Some people get cancer and go to work. True. I would argue the difference there is that people who have cancer, A, have a for sure diagnosis of what's causing the problem already, which automatically makes what the problem actually is kind of irrelevant, because what the problem actually is cancer now. It's no longer a list of symptoms that are kind of like, okay, but you're in your 20s. That seems kind of weird for somebody in their 20s, or whatever the case is. That's the point where it stops being a list of vague, non-defined illness, and it becomes a thing that people already have a preset definition of, whether it's accurate or not. In their heads, people are fighting, people who have cancer are fighting freaking wars in some other, like, mental, physical plane of existence against a giant devil named cancer, and it means something, if that makes sense. Like, it's not so much that I feel touched, because I don't really. It's more that I have difficulty finding the line where I'm explaining why a seemingly healthy 20-something-year-old who is currently standing here talking to you in a looking totally normal, in a totally normal tone of voice, looking more or less the same as I always have, as if nothing's changed, talking about having long-term, actively worsening health problems severe enough to put, like, literal long-term life goals off indefinitely and move 700 miles, basically spur of the moment. Finding the line between explaining what it is that's severe enough to for that to be the result, and well, even just that. I feel like in some situations there's also this tug of war with this other part of my brain that is, like, desperately afraid of accidentally trauma dumping on somebody. So it, like, backs up to the extreme opposite corner of that spectrum. But in this case, I feel like it really is more like just, I don't know how to succinctly explain as I've got such a weird, like, miasma of different vague, some vague, some not vague, some changing, some not changing, on and off sort of, like, conglomeration of symptoms that there's no real way to, It's not like I can be like, okay, well, I have debilitating migraines every other week. Or there's no succinct way to be like, this is why this is so bad. I guess, if that makes sense. Hold on, let me catch up on. Sorry, I was trying to get the thought pulled together and out of my mouth before it fell apart again. He says, my thing is like fighting a war against an enemy I still barely understand. Yeah, I get that. If you don't trust your word, it's, and that's the thing, is that goes back to having to do with, hold on, that was weird. I clicked a separate tab by mistake. Oh, okay. Did my stream drop at some point? I accidentally clicked to another tab, and the other tab I clicked to was the one where I keep, like, my channel window up just to keep an eye on what's actually, like, being shown on stream in case I need to double check what's live and how much delay and all that stuff. And it said I was offline, but I was still seeing chat messages come in. Sorry, I got confused there for a second. Still confused, but we're still live, so I'm just ignoring it, I guess. It's not so much a fear of the other person not trusting my word. It's more like not knowing how to express my word in a way that is accurately dramatic without feeling melodramatic, I guess. Might be another way of putting it. ABS and asthma. My family takes my asthma seriously because of how I look. Yeah, that pissed me off too. Kind of understand. It's a total working class. Fair enough. It's entirely possible that they were total nonsense, to be honest. Okay, so actually, I might be able to. Okay, I actually have a really good analogy, which only works because you have experience with asthma. So, I've never really had much problem with like general asthma, but I've always had pretty bad exercise-induced asthma, which tends to vary depending on how active I've been. Like when I was dancing competitively, it very gradually got better, but that's also how we found out I had it to begin with. But first time I ever had like full-blown asthma attack, I think I was 11 or 12, maybe. It was right after dance class. Hold on, I'm filtering through the story for the relevant bits so I don't get sidetracked by random irrelevant story details. To use it as an analogy, it's the difference between me going to my mom coughing and wheezing and being like, you know, a little bit frantic and like, Mom, I can't breathe, because who wouldn't be a little bit frantic about that, especially when you're middle school. And if I had gone to my mom totally calm and casual and been like, so I'm kind of having some trouble breathing right now. It's like, okay, you don't really act like somebody who's having trouble breathing right now. In fact, you're walking and talking and you seem perfectly normal. Usually there would be a certain, I get it, because me too, but even like immediate crisis aside, that's where I have difficulty with the explaining this stuff, because in my head I don't know how to not see the whole like explaining health issues as basically being the same situation where I'm walking up to somebody totally calm and collected and being like, hey, so I really can't breathe right now, and expecting them to do anything but give me a raised eyebrow, like a, okay, you look fine, you sound fine, so what's the problem? Like, in my head, those two situations are completely analogous. The difference just being, obviously, one of them is medically urgent, and the other one is, you know, has more to do with people's perception of your sense of realism and the amount of bullshit that you spew. But that's where I have trouble, like, because I'm not the dramatic type. I never have been. So it's very much not my style to make a whole, like, I don't even think I would know how to make like a whole like emotional dramatic show out of explaining how much I've been struggling over the last, what is it now, 10 almost 10 months, 9 months, no matter how much it's true, because my brain doesn't have that setting. But I also don't know how to not have a not have the setting for emotional dramatic outpouring of months of struggle and let me tell you all about it. I don't know how to, because I don't have that setting, I don't know how to explain stuff in a way that actually like still registers with people as, yes, this was still this much of a struggle. It just, I don't know how to, it's not me to express it that way, but I have to express it in some way that still expresses what it is I'm trying to express, otherwise I'm not communicating, right? I'm not saying like act or make a show of it, because honestly I'd make myself gag if I tried. But exercise, pursue it. It's like torture, but honestly I don't even tell people anymore unless I have to, because you don't want to embellish anything or act like I wouldn't normally, but in my head, wow, feels like I'm trying to. Yeah, that's very much how I am with a lot of things, actually. Although I think in my case it's less me not wanting to embellish anything and more that I don't know how to say it like it is, because I don't have an embellishment setting. Like, it's almost like the standard expected thing is at least to have the, for lack of a better phrasing, the expression of emotional trauma in the delivery, if that makes sense. Whereas I don't know how to convey, yes, it's been a goddamn nightmare, without quite getting that, without having to go as melodramatic as saying it's a goddamn nightmare in order to get past the part where I'm not acting the bit or whatever. Is that making any more sense? Or am I just continuously confusing you more? Dallas says I would always freak out a little watching my bro hack and puke after working out. Real talk, yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that's where the part of my brain that is, for whatever reason, like, super allergic, not allergic, super terrified of accidentally trauma dumping on somebody without either realizing that's what I'm doing or without meaning to, that saying something like, it's been such a nightmare, to me just feels like being melodramatic and begging for sympathy, which, I don't know if it actually originated on Twitch, but that's the place I've seen it used the most. Basically, like, so for example, there are certain kinds of trolls who will, or sometimes they're not trolls, sometimes they're just online socially inept, but people who will go into a chat and they'll say hi, and when the streamer goes, how are you doing, they will unload some massive, like, super heavy, super traumatic, like, horrible, wrenching story of what they're dealing with in their life into the chat, regardless of what's going on in chat, regardless of whether anybody's talking about anything heavy. Like, people could be playing Mario Kart and talking about Mario Kart, and this person will come in and say hi, and as soon as the streamer's like, oh hey, how's it going, they dump all the trauma, basically. It's considered highly impolite at the very best, and trollish / emotionally manipulative at the worst, for probably obvious reasons. I guess it could probably be used to describe any time that somebody gives you a bigger dose of the emotional drama of their current life story than you thought you were getting yourself in for. Dolly says, I think I understand that. Who doesn't love Mario Kart? I feel like not loving Mario Kart is sort of like not loving pizza. It's like, you're not human. You're making a good show of it, but I'm pretty sure there's some part of you that is not human. So he says, not wanting to seem like fishing for sympathy, so I self-internalized back in. Oops, I just realized I've got a ghost label on my forehead that's not actually labeling a ghost. My bad. It's just a habit I picked up since I was a kid. Yep. Very, very much the same. I can only assume that it was something I learned from my dad, because my mom's never been the emotionally suppressed type, shall we say. Like, she's not, like, excessively dramatic or anything, but, you know, she expresses a normal amount of emotion, you know. My dad basically runs on a gamut from mildly mischievous and amused to grouchy and irritated and best avoided, which really is not that far up that end of the spectrum either. So his spectrum is like this big. Robot people. Is it racist to say robot people? I suppose that it depends on whether robots count as a race. I would argue they count as a species. So I'd say you're probably not racist, but you might be speciesist, if that's a thing. These days it probably is somewhere. So if I pack it in, it gets worse. If I dump it, I feel guilty for burdening other people. Yeah, yeah. And especially, I think part of it too goes back to the whole being a listener thing that you and I have talked about before, Dallas, where, like, I feel like maybe we get a little oversensitized to the perceived amount of emotional burden that we're dropping on somebody else, because we've done so much listening that we've had a whole lot of shit dumped on us. like maybe the being the go-to person for people who both don't have a problem with it and or maybe do it a little too much, depending on the person. Being the go-to listener of choice for those people, I feel like kind of oversensitizes us to how much we share with other people. I just don't know how to fix it. See, I don't need a psychologist to psychoanalyze me. I'm pretty good at psychoanalyzing myself. I just don't know how to fix any of the problems I figure out. I suppose that's where the shrink is supposed to come in. The problem is, well, you know, like, but I think I can relate to that. I think it's very closely related, if not basically the root of the same thing. I want to ask you something, but I have to figure out how to phrase it. Don't feel like you have to answer for anything. Just a curiosity. But do you find that sharing or expressing certain feelings, and I'm talking like, I'm ignoring positive feelings because who doesn't like sharing positive feelings? As far as more negative feelings go, do you find that certain emotions or like general categories of negative feeling almost feel for lack of a better word, worse to it? No, that's too big. Weightier, more burdensome, or yeah, I guess that's a better way of putting it. More burdensome to share with somebody else than other negative emotions. I had a lot of zigzags in that question. I'm going to try and rephrase a little more succinctly. Do you feel like sharing certain negative emotions lays more of a burden on the other person than sharing other also negative emotions? Or like some sharing or expressing some feelings almost feels like you're demanding more of them than others. Does that make sense? Is this how your brain works, Dallas? This sounds like you. Oh my gosh. I think that's the first time I've ever heard of anybody talking like me. Usually I just confuse the shit out of people. I mean, that's not to say I haven't gone in plenty of circles trying to fix previously caused confusion in this very conversation, but, you know. Usually, yeah. And yes. It's like your asthma, but for the brain instead of the body. Yeah. This alone is kind of nice, honestly. Especially when you're expressing weird stuff that a lot of people just don't get because it's weird and not like whatever this societal equivalent of neurotypical would be. Neurodivergent, but on a social thinking level, I guess. I don't think it's weird. You just walk the line of thought much further than most would. People are lazy. This is true. And it's not like I'm known for overthinking or anything. But that being said, I mean, with the disclaimer, because this is recorded on the internet, that I do not recommend this method for anybody ever. Professionals are excellent. At the same time, to be fair, I haven't tried very hard, at least not in many, many years, but I've never met a psychologist, counselor, shrink, whatever classification you want to give them, who I was able to make any sort of connection with at all. And I gave up pretty early on because A, they're not cheap, B, insurance doesn't like paying for them, and C, if they're not doing you any good anyway, why fight the insurance and spend the money? But for me, I feel like it almost, the self-psychoanalysis, is that a word? Can we make it a word? For me, it was almost a survival thing, though, because in a manner of speaking, over the course of a few months or so, I basically I'm muting the mic again. The cat's trying to steal my donut holes. People often want things into simple categories too. Life is so often not that simple. Yeah, some of them get ridiculously good at trying to force it into boxes and pretending it fits anyway. Boggles my mind sometimes. Mine and Dallas's argument for 30 years. What? Whether life is simple or whether people want things to be simple? I'm really curious what the opposing argument there is, because, I mean, like you said, people are lazy. Lazy people like simple things because they require less brain power. Lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, for me the psychoanalysis was sort of a self-preservation thing, because I basically I went through a bout of major depression when I was 15, where there was the way it set in was sort of weird, in that it started off with just fatigue, and then at some point it switched into almost like this low-key, almost dissociative sort of thing where it was sort of like my brain was on autopilot and I was sort of like half asleep somewhere in the back of my head. I don't... I'm trying to describe it off of the fumbling analogies of a 15-year-old at the time, combined with very rusty memories of something that feels like 10 lifetimes ago. But, basically what ended up happening was, I attempted suicide, ended up in the hospital, and for a week straight, for a week in the hospital, and then for months afterwards, I heard the question why over and over and over and over and over again. Like, I actually got involuntarily committed to a youth psych ward for a week because they asked me why, and I couldn't give them an answer. I didn't know, because it was sort of like, the depression had taken over and put me on autopilot, but because I didn't know I was on autopilot, I didn't even realize that it was the depression calling the shots and not me. So when people said why, I didn't have a rational explanation. Like, well, is there something going on in your life? Did you break up with your boyfriend? No. No, my boyfriend's great. He wrote me a letter in the hospital. Like, but it turned into a very... That was all I heard for months. So that was March 16th, 2008. There you go. I just dated myself. My parents actually pulled me out of school for the rest of the semester. I was attending this little tiny private high school, so basically, and it was like 3/4 of a mile from our house. So I would either walk or my mom would drive me up to school after the school day ended to meet with teachers, get homework, get whatever tutoring help I needed, and then I basically went back to being homeschooled for the rest of the semester. Basically because they couldn't get a why out of me. Because I didn't have one to give. But instead of, like, they didn't understand that. They couldn't figure out how anybody, even a 15-year-old with or without, like, chemical mental health issues, how anybody could do something and not have something so drastic and not have some sort of rationale for it or something, even if it's not a good one. And I legitimately didn't. It was, I want to go to sleep and wake up when I'm not tired anymore. The problem is I'm always tired, and fuck it, everything's overwhelming. I want to go to sleep until it all goes away. And so that's basically what I tried to do. Except, not temporarily necessarily. But it wasn't like a... But I couldn't tell them anything that made enough sense to them to satisfy the answer to their question. So basically they started doing what they did my whole childhood, where when, if I'm being stubborn or I'm not doing what I need to be doing, then they take away privileges, is always what it was. It was consequences. So they started taking stuff away. I didn't have a phone yet, so they couldn't take that away, but I actually got a phone a month and a half later, and then they took that away again later. Eventually, all they had left to take away as a consequence, until I stopped being so stubborn about talking to them about this thing that I literally had nothing in my head to explain. The only thing that they had left to take away was school, because that was where, like, I actually had a small friends group. I mean, my whole graduating class was 21 people. My friends group was like 5, and that was literally more friends than I had had in my entire life put together. But they were the ones asking, are you okay? Are you hanging in there? Do you need anything? Is there anything we can do for you? Do you want to get ice cream sometime? You know, the nice, kind, supportive, non-pressury shit. Whereas my parents, just to clarify, I don't blame them. They were, I'm the oldest child. They'd never dealt with anything like this before. They were in panic fix it before it happens in a final sort of way, you know, mode. And I get that now, because I've gotten pretty decent at the psychoanalysis thing, and I know my parents pretty well. Like, I get that, and I don't blame them for it, but at the same time, it was exactly the opposite of what I needed. But because I didn't care about television. I mean, I wasn't allowed on the computer unsupervised anyway. So I didn't own a cell phone. So it was like, all I really had left to take away was A, grounding me, which they'd already done twice repetitively and pretended they hadn't because they were running out of things, and then preventing me from going to school, which was where I got to see my friends anyway. So I was out of school for the rest of that semester, but I think some like survivalist part of my brain went, okay, I don't have an answer to the reason why, or to the question of why, which means I also don't know how to prevent this from happening again. Nobody else is helping me figure that out. Everybody else is like, and I tried to cooperate, like, I think that might be where the psychoanalysis got started, was me trying to come up with answers where I did not have any. And then eventually I gave up because my dad is pretty good at reading certain things in people. Like, for example, when you're making up shit that you think is what he wants to hear, he's always been pretty good at picking up on that shit. So he could tell. So he was like, well, she's bullshitting. She's telling me what I want to hear, so I'll get off her back, which was, I mean, partially true, but also partially not. And not the point. I wasn't saying what I thought he wanted to hear only to get him off my back. It was because I literally had nothing else I could say. So then I just gave up saying anything at all, and kind of that was when I learned that just because somebody is asking you a question over and over and over again does not mean that you cannot just stare at your lap for an hour on end and pretend nothing is happening. But in my head, somewhere in the back of it, you know, a 15-year-old minimal maturity level, I think the puzzle solving and the survival oriented parts of my brain had gotten together and were like, okay, so we don't have a why. This has been firmly established. Nobody else is helping us find a why. So how do we prevent this then? If we're not entirely sure what caused it to begin. Well, instigate 10, 15, 20 years of well, not quite 20 yet, but 10, 15, 16, 17 years of psychoanalysis of myself as, like, I mean, but it worked. Here I am. I'm almost 30. I'm still friggin' here. So, you know, something worked. But I kind of think that that's sort of where, how I ended up starting the whole, like, seemingly obsessive deep dive into overthinking my own brain or something.
Breakfast burrito. Elote that's been grilled just right.
Sorry, I was trying very hard to stay focused on the relevant train of thought there, so I was not keeping up very well with the chat, because I was trying very hard not to get sidetracked and forget where there was enough backstory required. I was afraid I was going to lose the point by the time I got there. It says I kick doors in far more and put things in a box, like, a lot. Like the creepy guy, you asked him... Creepy guy? You asked him why he wanted it, I just killed him. Oh, gotcha. Gotcha. No. Oh, that... Yeah. That basically sums up my interaction with most things in a nutshell. Trying to figure out what it is and why that's the case, and therefore how it functions. And then what relation that has to whatever I've got going on. Just to be clear, any situation where I found out what he wanted and why he wanted it, and it was still going to cost me whatever it was that I needed, I would have killed him too. I just would have asked all the questions first. I mean, wouldn't it suck if I just got impatient and shot him, and turns out we wanted the same thing anyway? Or, I don't know. I feel like the example went a little haywire, but hopefully you get what I mean. I lost my place again. Hold on. Oh, that's because I scrolled up too far. Dallas's experience has its place. That's why I argue that war is sometimes inevitable, with friends that argue that peace is always an option. I can see that. Well, and that, it all comes down to values, right? Like, expedience has a cost. The question is the cost higher than higher to you based on what you value than it's worth? The problem is that that's where personal values come into it, and that's where there is no objective answer, which is probably why so many people come up with so many different answers. Father Next had to die, Dallas. I retort, yeah, but sometimes war is faster, sadly. Oh, definitely. The question is the cost of being faster a cost to what you value? Or what you value most, I should say. Because you can value something and still not value it more than expediency, right? But if the expediency costs the one thing you value more than everything else, all of a sudden maybe faster isn't such an appealing option after all. It kind of depends on the situation, right? But I totally get what you're saying. Like, that's me agreeing with you and overthinking and expanding it, by the way, in case that wasn't clear. Oh, damn it. Scroll wheel spazzed again. Hold on. There's Prozernax. Prozernax is my navigation point in this chat right now. It's difficult to find that box to check to explain an easy answer for some. Exactly. Yeah, when they don't have the personal experience to draw on, they can't really like wrap their heads around it. Okay, so taking only the sentence by sentence context of chat, it's difficult to find that box to check to explain an easy answer for some people, particularly those from an observer side of things, because dragons suck. Was how I read that, like, in order as though that was what that was a response to. I know what you were talking about. It was just, the way my brain read it was strictly sequential, regardless of what made sense. I got it. It's easy for me to go off into tangents. Thank you. I tried really hard. Some days it's better than others, but I'm working on it, and I feel like I'm actually getting somewhere with the working on it today. Some days I feel like I work on it, and all I do is go off on double the tangent. But you know, as long as I'm. As long as I can hang on to what the point I was getting to. Where I tend to get sidetracked is when there's backstory explanation involved, which for me there almost always is, because almost nobody that I know or would be having like this level of complexity of conversation with. Almost none of them, if any of them, like maybe one, my best friend. She's pretty much the only one who's actually been around for any significant part of any of the backstory that's required to explain it, whatever my point is, pretty much regardless of what we're talking about. It's like, okay, there's gonna be backstory involved, and I have a tendency to get distracted by the storytelling part of the backstory and forget the throw out relevant details even if it doesn't tell the whole story, because the point is not that you're telling a story, the point is that you're giving context for something you were getting to. Do you remember what that was? No? Oh, man. Too bad. It's kind of how it goes a lot of the times. See why you enjoy this game, though? It's the spiderwebs. Touching each other, I bet it's gratifying. It's certainly fun. It's certainly fun. See, you still went into the same box. Wait, which box? I agree. My point is that people often value faster as opposed to what is valued. Yeah, exactly. I would argue too often, a lot of times. Maybe even more often than not in certain cultures. I specify certain cultures because until I see proof with my own eyes, I'm desperately clinging to the belief that America as a culture does not represent the world as a culture. I mean, maybe parts of it, but not everything as a whole. Because I know that's not true. I watch YouTube. Same. Parthenax redeems himself in my save file too. Just with his life. I forgive him. As a kid was mountain. You know, it's been so long since I've only played one complete playthrough of Skyrim. And it's been so long, I don't actually remember, like, solidly one way or the other a lot of the decisions that I made. I feel like I have a hard time imagining that I didn't forgive Parthenax, though. In fact, I'd be willing to bet, having almost no memory of the actual, like, interaction itself at this point, but knowing myself, I would be willing to bet that I handled that if somebody had like a way to listen in on the thoughts going through my head, you would have heard basically what you've heard through most of Dragon Age, which is me going, okay, I'm not sure I trust you, but so far, what you're saying rings true, so I'm willing to at least listen, with a grain of salt. Okay. Alright, now where do the motives actually lie here? Like, what makes the most logical sense motivationally? Okay, I don't actually see any particular motive for stabbing me in the back, or any motive for going through all this just to stab me in the back, so... Plus, there are benefits, plus, I don't have to kill this really cool-looking dragon. Plus, then he owes me his life, or whatever. Like I said, I barely remember any of the interaction itself, but, like, I imagine that I probably went through that whole normal process that you guys have seen me do time and again on Dragon Age, and came to the conclusion that I'm almost certain I let him live. I have a hard time imagining that I wouldn't have, just knowing me. I don't remember like selecting the droids, but I have a really hard time imagining myself killing him at any point before I absolutely had to.